Hello and welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live on turning AI into a strategic asset. I am Freya Scammells. I head up the AI practice at Caspian One and enjoy working with leaders from across all different types of financial organizations on their AI strategy, workforce, and other great things. So a lot of this LinkedIn Live is inspired by some of the questions we continue to see coming up. And I also want to welcome my fantastic co-host, Kim Richards, who we have here today. Kim, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent the majority of my career focused on financial services strategy and transformation, especially on that enabled by new technologies such as AI. I've spent my career spread across both the New York City and London markets, first with Booz and Company, then PwC Strategy and lastly, as an MD with an Accenture who was leading the capital markets strategy function as well as overall generative AI efforts for the firm.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure you've also got some really great insights as to what financial services firms have been doing well, what some of their challenges have been. And I think we can see now, especially moving into 2026, I speak with a lot of clients where really we're almost beyond pilots and models are moving more and more into production. And that's fantastic evolution, but also it comes with their challenges. So I think now it's not so much about who has AI, but who's actually using it in a way where they're seeing changes and successful outcomes. So we're focusing today on three key questions. We will try and keep it within the 15 minutes we have, but once we get chatting, we do tend to sometimes take a little bit longer. So we'll try and keep it as concise as possible. But also for anybody watching, please use the comment section or get in touch with us directly to feedback if you have any other points that you've seen come up that you would love us to talk about on a future session. But for today, we're going to be looking at what it really means to treat AI as a strategic asset, how firms are aligning AI with real business goals, and why culture and not always technology can be the biggest blocker. So starting with what does it mean to treat AI as a strategic asset rather than a tactical tool? Kim, from all of your wealth of experience working within capital markets and financial services and kind of seeing teams at the early stage of building their strategy all the way out to kind of rolling things out in real life and across the business, what do you see when you think about treating AI as a strategic asset rather than a tactical tool? And maybe where have you seen that work successfully?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd say first, in terms of the framing, I completely agree with kind of, where we are, which is people, I'd say currently a lot of financial services orgs, are still in experimentation mode, but we're immediately on the cusp of where that's coming to an end. And I really think the time of going on and pursuing AI initiatives with limited focus on ROI, I think is also coming to an end. I think we've hit what I see is actually a good sign of in terms of, maturity, in terms of how people are actually thinking about what are we getting from the investments that we make in this. So as I think about this question about, strategic asset versus a tool, I kind of think of it in, three areas, maybe increasing in terms of sophistication. I'd say the first is, just getting straight to the tactical to a point. Like, what does that mean? I think about that is when organizations are thinking about, okay, how do I apply AI maybe to a specific, use case that maybe, we've got in some pocket of the organization where we've got senior leadership interested in it, or, we happen to have, ownership at this specific area. So this is our little remit. Let's go ahead and try certain things out. Or we've heard there's a new tool on the market. Heard good things. Let's give that a try. In other instance, and also in that, what I put in that domain is things such as re-engineering, like a very specific, piece of a domain. Like we outsource X piece of data cleansing, ticket management, or, we've heard good things about code assist. Like that's all the kind of things where I think about, as a tactical tool. It's very limited in scope, maybe, and usually frequently it's applying things that are kind of just off the shelf that already have a good amount of traction. Where leading organizations now and where I think the market is going is people have been thinking about this more so the angle of how can we serve our clients better? And that can be from that angle, as well as what are the invisible things that happen behind the scenes in any organization that, need to happen, risk, compliance, all of your other horizontal functions. How do you do those more efficiently at a higher quality? And I think, again, leading organizations are thinking about this as what is the right scale for us to be at when we're looking at these initiatives in a way that it actually can move the dial on operational metrics or, ideally, ROI as well. And where I'd like to kind of cap this is when we think about about where the market's going overall, really leading folks out there in the industry are starting to think about this as bigger questions, such as why do I have really any people at all, aside from some management layer, oversitting things such as HR ops? Why is this not really like a platform-driven function with most of the work being done agentically? And look, as somebody who comes from a cost and digital transformation, background, I think that's absolutely an ambitious North Star for the market to be aiming towards. And I think the best practice around that is something where you dream big, but then you've also got to work backwards and anchor that, it back in reality and kind of, what is feasible to get done like within a year or two. So for example, that could be things where, right now, what the organization is looking to do are things like piloting resume screening, resume screening tools, at the moment. But the best practice is really to think about both past, somewhere between that tactical thing, somewhere between the really ambitious thing, and then what is the common ground there that you can go after? Because there almost always is some. So for example, it could be at, the first step is let's look some more at the agentic functionalities that already are reasonably well enabled based on Workday or whatever platform that we have, or you can bring in a vendor who's going to, build and mock ups, certain things. So anyways, those are just some starting thoughts overall on the kind of what I see as a spectrum from really tactical to truly ambitious when you're thinking about your strategy.
That aligns a lot with what I've been hearing from leaders and a lot of the conversations that we're having with people who are looking at AI or trying to look at it more strategically, specifically within financial services. But I know this goes across a lot of different industries. I think one other question that tends to come up, or I guess area that's evolving as we have this new world of AI, is how mature organizations are owning AI within the business as well, and if that's making it more strategic, it being AI strategy being kind of owned by the business side as opposed to it just being owned by the tech side and then working in harmony. And I think that also brings up a really interesting point around workforce for the future. Obviously, with a lot of technology within financial organizations, you won't just have the tech, but you'll have strong business analysts, business systems analysts that are looking at bridging that gap really closely between business and technology. And then we start to look at maybe roles for the future. I know AI strategists or almost quite technical AI minded business analysts who really understand the financial services industry can add massive value. So I think there's one area where does it make it more strategic for AI to be sat more within business and tech supporting as opposed to just within tech? And then from that, does it also open up kind of these new roles, which are AI minded technologists who really understand the business side and can really bridge that gap? How have you seen that kind of play out when it comes to looking at it more as a strategic asset as opposed to just a tactical tool which might just be used to automate certain tasks?
No, I think that that's very similar to what I've seen, and I think it really parallels the evolution that the market is going within this regards. Because exactly as what you were saying, in a lot of instances, a lot of these initiatives, are rightly owned by the IT function. And I think historically, and many, not all, but many organizations where that sits is that in some areas it might sit within an IT function that's embedded within a business, or sometimes it's a central IT function. But I think what I'm starting to see is many more organizations are really starting to think about how does AI actually have much more, how do we think about becoming more of an AI native organization? How do we really use this as a lever for reinvention? I'm frequently starting to hear executives say more things such as, who is bringing the AI visioning to the C-suite, and then ultimately to the board, and someone who's able to do that in a language that everyone's going to understand, and be able to, understands also maybe the guts and the operations of the business in such a way to really own and bring this this together. And I think that's one thing I've actually seen a lot of organizations, I think, just pilot a few different things to try to see what works for them, such as, okay, does it make sense? What's the type of role that we have? For example, if we're really leaning in on workforce, I've seen some organizations who are thinking about this kind of, chief chief digital human officer and about like that. And sometimes it's not a brand new role. It's a dual hat of somebody else who already sits in the organization, but like somebody who has that specific remit at that level of the organization to be thinking about how are you managing reinvention.
And that kind of is a nice segue into our next area to talk about, which is how are financial organizations aligning the AI initiative successfully with broader business goals? And I think leading organizations who start with a business problem and not a model tend to be asking questions around where do poor decisions cost us the most, and where are humans overloaded or inconsistent, and also where does speed directly reduce risk or increase revenue. And as you mentioned, I think AI initiatives that from the start are tied directly to outcomes such as profitability, risk reduction, or regulatory resilience, and that's kind of measured throughout the process as opposed to being like an afterthought after something's already cost a lot of money. How do you see that in terms of the way successful firms are operating?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll kind of start off maybe just by kind of talking about what are the areas where I'm seeing the greatest business value
Great.
kind of across, financial services organization. That, of course, being a spread of orgs. So what's more relevant to some orgs may not apply to all. But I think also anchoring back to what I was saying before, where a lot of the market has started was looking, for exactly as you were saying, kind of looking out for those value footholds. You kind of started narrower and with something ideally with a low testing or configuration or data burden, and then you're kind of expanding on the back of that and getting to a clear path to value. So what does that look like in practice? So I would say there's again going back to my client versus internal lens of looking at the world. From the client facing perspective, I kind of see a lot of the starting points as things such as where a lot of orgs have already seen financial services and beyond a reasonable amount of success. So that includes things such as customer support, and also really, I'd say kind of your internal relationship manager, banker, wealth manager, like that kind of internal support of just admin burden of everything around client notes, client meeting prep, follow-ups and synthesis and things like that. The expansion points where I'm seeing like the market go to really capture the broader value around those pieces is around things such as it can be, bridging the silos around more bridging across organizational silos or even horizontals kind of for more effective, client engagement. It's not just whatever interaction Kim the banker is having with her specific, clients and her specific, data and interaction and history with them. It's bringing together, that 360 view of the client in order to make all of your conversations with that firm more
That
productive.
full context.
Precisely. It's been a
Yeah.
holy grail in the industry for a while, and I think a lot of people are excited about AI hopefully getting us a little bit closer to that. But also, I've seen people think about it also as well as in terms of, supercharging sales. Of just, again, you pick off some of the lower pieces, but overall, then it's like, okay, on the back of that, like how, when you've got that unified context, how can you actually make me able as a salesperson be able to spend a lot less time on kind of the nitty gritty of drafting emails and things like that if you've got like a source of truth in terms of the information as it's being managed. Like how do you measure that to reduce any type of time that I'm spending collectively on types of admin? And I guess another big one that I would say that I'm seeing as well is around things such as client lifecycle management and onboarding, especially more in the deep in the B2B world. These are perennial pain points where it takes 6, 8 months longer sometimes to onboard new clients. So how do you actually think about transforming that experience to be as quick and as painless for your clients as possible? On more of the internally facing side, what I'm seeing as the starting points are, again, more so where there's some degree of proven solutions in the market. So things like coding assist, document automation, some degree of, marketing, and of course, certain things, around like cyber intelligence. But where I'm seeing the market expand and continue to go are things such as how do we one of the near-term levers that from a cost reduction standpoint for any organization to be able to go after are things such as outsourced spend. So, for example, how can I look at my BPO, agency spend, risk spend, and things like that, and find a way to be able to, within the next 6 months or next billing cycle, be able to, reduce the amount of spend that we're spending on some of those external functions. Another big area I'm seeing a lot of interest in are things around, risks and reporting. There's a lot of operational pieces that happen behind the scenes at most organizations on pieces like this and things like transaction processing. And then again, finally, when I'm starting to see really early experimentation around is some of these future of functions, I would call them. Again, that's more so, early experimentation, but that's really thinking about, especially within a specific horizontal, like how do I think about, looking at HR or corporate finance and maybe rethinking how a lot of that exists and supports our organization end to end. But that's still pretty early stages, I'd say.
That makes complete sense. And I think as well, and the last topic that we were going to focus on today, it brings in an interesting perspective when we look at, yes, absolutely, like the build of AI and the actual tech side, but then there's that human AI collaboration. And when we're looking at the biggest blockers, it can sometimes not actually be the technology. It can be how humans are adopting, how humans are actually utilizing that technology, trust and accountability. And what would you say are some of the biggest cultural or environmental blockers that you've seen within the industry when it comes to blocking AI adoption at scale?
Yeah, absolutely. Just
I'm
to
sure
start
there's
on your
many, but kind of
yes.
the top ones that you've seen quite regularly.
Yeah, if I had to just for the sake of brevity really hone in maybe on a couple, I'd start exactly where you had mentioned, which is that angle around, workforce. So look, I think and kind of the fear of employment or the impact this is going to have on people's, employment, maybe not even directly themselves if you're a more senior manager, but your team more broadly, like that's a very real thing that we're all seeing, in the market across society more broadly. You look at any surveys that are going out, it's pretty obvious, right? And I think another key thing is to keep in mind that corporate cultures aren't built overnight. And I think we all probably secretly know that to what degree in terms of a transparency on a trust spectrum, kind of where does the corporate communications typically lie, and either through formal or as well as maybe more importantly informal channels, like to what degree does that already exist? Because if that's something that's and look, the larger the organization, like it gets much harder, right? It's just a function in many instances of scale alone. So it's kind of if there's already a bit of that environment of things where there's a history of cost transformations and things like that, where originally were packaged up as other things, and then it's just it's one of those things I think organizations do need to be really mindful of, just in terms of how these efforts are going to be perceived, and typically how your communications are perceived within an organization.
And I guess just from that as well, then if the trust and the transparency isn't really there within the organization from the start, this is probably just gonna make that even more obvious.
It's a log on the fire. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's exactly right. It's almost not about the AI. This is kind of a broader thing, and this is just
yeah.
the latest thing to be throwing into the mix.
And also,
It's
I was just going to say with leadership as well, it's one thing kind of how that's communicated and cascaded down within the organization, but with a lot of leaders, particularly on the business side, or maybe who haven't interacted as much with I think sometimes there can be hesitation when they're not confident on how to explain how some of the models work or the tech side
sure.
of things. And, they're having to justify decisions to regulators. And sometimes I guess might feel a bit personally exposed if things go like quote unquote wrong or not as expected. So that's something I've also seen a little bit from the leadership as well, which then might have that knock-on effect on how that's communicated down to the workforce as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I think the market is moving really quickly, and this industry is moving in terms of dog years, right? Especially right at the moment. So, it's just sometimes in areas like things are moving so quickly. What your intentions and what you're trying to do a year ago, they can be quite different, now. And I think that's one thing that's so interesting. I feel like more broadly at the executive level, I feel like everybody feels like they're trying to play catch up. Like 95% of the market feels like they're trying to feel catch up. So anyways, if you're feeling that way by your organization, you've got like a lot of good company. You may actually not be as far behind as you think. It's just that this is moving that rapidly for everyone.
Absolutely. I also think we've just got a question in from the audience. I think we have a few more minutes. We have gone over time as expected, but we will keep going. How do successful firms reframe AI internally so employees see it as a capability building rather than a threat when rolling it out on scale? So, would you say that you've seen anything rolled out quite successfully, or do you have any hints or tips for leaders who are going to have to kind of frame that with employees on how they could maybe cushion that, or see it more as capability building and strategic as opposed to something that's just going to replace the workforce?
Yeah. So I would say this may be an unpopular, a little bit of a bold opinion, so bear with me. I think when it comes to these types of things, truly honesty and like thinking ahead up front are really the best policy, and you have to do both of them in concert together. Again, I don't think anybody is going out with poor intentions. It's just sometimes that people are trying, in there as they're kind of saying catch up with this. So for example, if you know that what you're realistically looking to do is reinvent, let's go back to my earlier example of maybe reinventing like HR ops or certain things, around that. I think what you need to be thinking as a person, if I were leading this transformation, I think the best way is you have to be thinking about this from a human first perspective in terms of where to begin and of what your options are, like how long is this realistic timeline, around things like this. There's something about bringing in like the right senior leaders deep into the fold, not just to get things done for you, but to actually be thought partners and kind of get them bought in on a change, that they're ultimately the ones leading the function. And even certain things such as thinking about the people who may, if it truly is just a cost exercise, is thinking about the people who are going to be impacted, and also thinking about realistically, like this is something that we could all be doing a better job of in pretty much all organizations. If you have an employee who's pretty smart, pretty good at what they're doing, a quick learner, works hard and things like that, there's no reason that, especially if you've given like a 2 to 3 year time frame, like that whole redeployment, even if it is something where it's, maybe they're going to be working in a slightly different function, or maybe you can put them more in like a business ops role or things like that. I don't think there's a specific reason why you can't try to think about like those people impacted, and think about in terms of truthfully, limiting that impact. As I've done cost transformation over the years, I'd say truly, and it's hard to do. There's a reason why it's not necessarily done this way. It takes a lot of intentionality and planning on behalf of leaders. But why not think of this up front as really, truly reskilling exercises? I'd say the vast majority of cost transformation programs, what they're able to do, if they're done really thoughtfully and really successfully, is actually just redeploy those people and those skill sets. Again, it might be a training profile, but if you've got somebody who's proved they're a good employee, they can probably learn how to do a lot of these new things and redeploy them to where the work is going to be continuing to grow. And again, what I've seen it from like leading organizations, if that's the case, then what it should be is 75% of your cost savings is not employees that you're exiting. It should be positions that you didn't have to hire for, positions you didn't have to necessarily hire for in the market, and workloads that that have gone away because you successfully automated those before. So anyways, it's really hard to do, but I think that should be the holy grail that we should all be aiming for as we think about some of these sensitive things. Because I think more than anything, when it comes to leadership, people can see and smell sincerity, right? Like we all can. It's just so if you really come at it with that angle to begin with, that helps.
And like you say, like wherever you can bring people along on the journey, I think as early as possible, so that the humans that are affected feel like they have either new opportunities or that they can really learn and upskill. But I think it's going to be interesting for L&D teams with the workforce of the future to be preparing for that, and to make sure that the workforce is in the right place, and also to make sure that AI is being utilized with as limited fear across the organization as possible. So we are approaching the end. So I would love to just kind of wrap up and leave everyone with Kim, with what we've been speaking about, turning AI into a strategic asset today. If you had kind of 2 to 3 takeaway points, suggestions, or insights you could just leave our audience with today. And of course, after this, we will be doing more LinkedIn Live. So please keep questions coming. We're happy to tackle them, and obviously would love everybody's feedback on that. But also, just to leave everyone with a bit of initial insight. And then if anyone would like to dig more into detail, both Kim and I are available. If you would like to connect with us on LinkedIn, we can always have a further conversation, particularly if you're working within financial services and any of these topics have come up as potential challenges, and you just need a little bit of guidance or a bit of feedback based on our perspective, which has been a blessing to be able to work with a lot of different financial organizations. So Kim, any kind of final points for the audience today on this topic?
Yeah, maybe just as a few final takeaways as kind of the macro recaps from my perspective. So I would say, first is thinking about how to really differentiate between, a tactical tool versus a strategic asset. Think about the ultimate litmus test is if I were to rebuild my business right now with a bunch of brilliant PhDs just minted from like the right type of schools, how would I rebuild this in an AI native way? That should be a bit of the holy grail that you're aiming towards. That's not necessarily where you're going to be spending your work in the next year or two, but I think it's so critical to have that long-term vision and roadmap in terms of how could this really be used for as a reinvention mechanism. That I think is really how I differentiate between, tactical tools versus strategic asset. Second would be is if you're thinking about, the broader business goals, make sure that you're thinking about this from starting out from a place of value, and then really expanding into the logical adjacencies, on the back of that, both from a client perspective area as well as internally facing areas. And especially the internal facing areas, think about we've all got them. Think about your organizations, kind of your perennial areas where you're spending lots of time, lots of money, lots of risk audits, things of that nature, where it's really a major operation for your organization is where to focus. And like last, I think is just in terms of, and kind of culture and orgs. We talked quite a bit in terms of the people and like emotional side. But Freya, I think one last thing that I'd like to hit on is just in terms of the AI upskilling angle. I think this is a really fascinating area because it's going to quickly move from just a tool familiar. I believe strongly it's going to move from just knowing the tool to how do you increase overall, AI literacy, such as how are you going to be teaching people to fact check things in a way where the hallucination pattern typically from AI is not the same error pattern as what you see in humans, or things such as how eventually the workforce is going to, a lot of people have grown up doing certain operational tasks you've learned by doing the work. So you have that intuition as to what's right or wrong. How do you teach that? And like the intuition of kind of what's right or wrong versus just, just having people automatically just go with whatever the tool is spitting out. That's something that's going to have to be, uptrained for. Another major element is things such as this new agentic workforce really starts to come live, like who is managing that? Who is supervising it? All the outpoints around that. So I think there's the other angle I'd want to hit on around workforce is just that second one in terms of this upskilling piece is going to be, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, and I think at this point it's kind of clear that AI success is not just about the technology, in some ways even less about the actual technology and more about the leadership and that human AI collaboration. And I would love to kind of touch upon that again in a future live. I know we do have some questions that unfortunately we haven't been able to get to today, but we are going to feed back on message to everybody that's commented. Thank you so much, Kim, for all of your great insights. And thank you so much, audience, for everyone who's tuned in. We will be doing follow-ups, like I said, so please pop your future questions in the comments. We'll get back to you, and it'll also be inspiration for future discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for the time.